Today, we're going to talk about more about daily life in a colonial village, and the focus today is how did people make a living, which is another way of saying what kind of jobs did people have. So, most people in New England were farmers. The majority of the people were farmers. They had small farms where they raised crops to feed their family. They had animals like cows and chickens and pigs and sheep. And they often raised a little extra of whatever crops they were growing, or they perhaps sold the wool or the meat from the animals that they raised. They mostly fed their families with it, but then they did have some extra that they sold to others. A job in many towns was that somebody might run a tavern, which is they would have their own house, and then a section of their house they would run as a tavern, which would be like a little restaurant. They're generally very small. And often taverns were really used for travelers who were going from one place to another, and they could go to the tavern and have food and get a drink, and also they could rent a room to sleep for the night. So that was something that you could be, which was the owner of a tavern. Many people were craftsmen, and a craftsman means that it's a person who makes something by hand and then sells it, or somebody who performs some kind of a service for others. So, this is an example of a craftsman in a colonial village. It's a blacksmith. So, a blacksmith often works in a building made out of stone because they always worked with fire and it was really hot, so stone was less likely to burn. And what this blacksmith is doing, he's got a piece of iron here and he heats it up in the flame, gets it really hot, and then bangs it with a hammer into a shape. So a blacksmith would make things like horseshoes, maybe iron pots and pans, tools, farm tools, all kinds of things that people needed. Another craftsman was a silversmith or possibly a goldsmith. They made nicer things, like this is a silver chalice down here, and this is a fancy silver bowl, or they made that's where the word silverware comes from because it was originally made with real silver. And so you could become a silversmith. This is a tinsmith. A tinsmith, it does sort of the same work as a silversmith, but they work with tin, which is what this thing is made out of. And they make more things that are not quite as nice as silver. This is a watering can. They might make some simple, this is like a really simple pot back here. So tin things are not quite as precious as silver. Some people were carpenters, although most people had basic carpentry skills. There were some people who were carpenters who made furniture and cabinets and things that they sold to others. This job doesn't really exist anymore. This is called a cooper, and a cooper made these barrels. These are wooden slats, and they're held together by these metal rings. And these were really important because they were the main way that people stored things. So you would store things like flour or sugar or grain or even liquids could be stored in those. And those were used for storage like within your house, but also people shipped things across the ocean in those barrels. A lumber mill or a sawmill was also an important part of a New England community. So one person might have the job of being a lumberjack, and they would cut down trees and they would bring it to the town and sell the trees to the person that owned the sawmill. And the person that owns the sawmill would then, with his workers, cut. This is a huge tree, and this is a big, humongous saw that's being powered by this wheel here. And it would cut the log into slats of wood like this, and then they would sell that wood to people who needed to make a house or something like that. So a sawmill or a lumber mill was in many towns. A printer was a job that was important. Many people in New England could read and write, which wasn't true everywhere. And so to print a newspaper or a book, you had to use this big machine, which is called a printing press. And creating a book or creating newspapers was actually really hard and took a long time. And that is what a printer would do. A baker or a brewer would bake things to sell, and a brewer would make beer, which was a very common drink in colonial times. So that could be a job that somebody might have in a town. And most of these people owned their own shops, and they sometimes were attached right to their house, but they also had workers. And a very common thing was something called an apprentice. This man here is an apprentice. This man is like the skilled craftsman. He looks like he's a tinsmith, and he's teaching this guy who's a younger person how to make something. So a boy who was maybe 14 years old and had finished their schooling, if he wanted to become, very few people went to college, so if he wanted to become a blacksmith or a silversmith, he might go and live. If this boy wanted to become a tinsmith, he would go live with the person that owned the tin shop, and he would work for free for a certain number of years, and the person would feed them, give them a place to sleep, and then teach them their craft. And when they were all done and they were able to do the craft, they would leave the shop and go open their own shop somewhere else. So that was very common for lots of boys to become an apprentice. Another really important job in New England during colonial times was, and it still is important, is to be a sailor or a fisherman or a trader. So in this picture, which is a sketch, they're showing how these men would go out in this small boat out into a bay, catch fish, and then bring them back. And here, this is a wheelbarrow full of fish. They would then take that fish to the market and sell it to people. So that would be fishermen. And there were also people who were shipbuilders. This is a picture of a shipyard, which is where they build these really huge ships. And ships were the only way to cross the ocean at that time. And so some people built the ship, some people made the sail, some people made the rope. And then the ships would sail back and forth with all these products that came from the colonies and mostly bring them to England. So shipbuilding, fishing, and trading were very important. There were other jobs. These weren't quite as popular. There were lawyers, there were doctors, teachers, and reverends. You had to go to college to have those jobs, and only a few people could afford to go to college, mostly wealthy people. And in the beginning, Harvard was their only choice, or they went back to England for college. But a minister or a reverend, they were the leader of the church. They were very important in the town. They had a very important position in the town. In the beginning of colonial times, only men could be schoolmasters, which is what we call a teacher. Now, only men could do that. Eventually, women can. There were some doctors. They were not nearly as well educated as doctors are now, but that was an option. So that's a quick summary of some of the some of the jobs that people had during colonial times, and they developed their own way of life in the colonies that was a little different from the way of life in England, and we're going to see how down the road that starts to cause a problem.